Hello and welcome to the Last Word on Spurs. We are your award-winning Tottenham Hotspur podcast and we return. Look, big show, big guests. You know, it's getting closer and closer to the start of the season. Thank you so much for joining us. If you're with us for the first time, you can find us on iTunes. We're on Spotify, across all major audio platforms. We're, of course, on X. We're on Instagram. We're on Facebook too. And joining me, look, he is, as ever, our crazy train conductor, the runner, the absolute king of the conductorship of Last Word on Spurs. Lee McQueen is back alongside me, sunning himself in Spain. The tan is coming along. Macca, how are you, my man?
I'm a lot less red than I was last time when I first came on when I was in Spain. So Lisa Tan's dropping in now. Yeah, I'm really good, mate. Thank you. And lovely to be back on with the legend that we're going to introduce, of course. And for all of you in the comments that are worrying about being late, don't worry about it. It's fashionable. It's fashionable to be late nowadays. And we were sorting out a technical problem on my end, actually, to be fair. So put my hands up on that. But look, yeah, lovely to be here. And I cannot wait to get into all things Spurs over the next hour. Or maybe 3, Rick, depending on how conscious of time you might be.
Don't tell our guest that. We'll never get him back like we've got him back the last 3-4 years. Don't tell him that. Look, I always say when this man comes on, we are joined by journalist royalty. We've had the absolute pleasure to strike up, for me, a real genuine friendship with this man over the course of the last 3-4 years. You know him. You see him on your screens. If you don't see him on your screens, you hear him through, whether that's your headphones, whether that's your AirPods. You know we're talking about. We're joined by assistant editor, columnist and football writer at the Daily Mirror. Been with that publication for over 23 years. And of course, as well, look, he's co-presenter on Sky Sports News. You see him around TalkSport, senior sports analyst over on CNN. It's the brilliant, the wonderful Darren Lewis. Bless us with his presence, Dal. Thank you so much. How are you, my man?
I'm really good. Thanks for having me back on the show. I always enjoy coming on here. I'm just glad I was being able to because you got quite a special season, I would imagine, coming up. So we got a lot to talk about. So thanks for having me on.
Bless you, mate. Thank you so much. The concern when people hear from the likes of you special and seasons worry Spurs fans because we're season 2. We're approaching that 18-month mark. And who knows what that means, that word special. Does that mean we're going to have a trophy season? Does it mean we're going to have a change of manager? Does it mean we're going to have 3 or 4 different managers of a season? We don't know. But the word special...
If England can get to a final of a European Championship 2 tournaments in a row, who knows?
Oh, man. I love that. Listen, I love that. Look, we are joined by, I say, broadcast royalty in the wonderful Darren Lewis. And you know what, Dal, it's interesting. We obviously spoke during the season. And listen, we're blessed to get you back on a couple of times a year. And I always try and time it as though I try and get down at a point that we haven't lost our minds completely yet with the transfer window, but we have lost our minds completely that we haven't signed anyone of any prominent nature as of yet. But again, we're seeing some real decent stars coming through, the likes, of course, of Archie Gray, Lucas Bergvall as well. And I think there is some genuine excitement in and around Spurs at the moment. Now, let's first start with you, then I'll come on to Macca. Give me your take of what you've made of Spurs in the last 12, 18 months. I mean, look, you was in and around some of Ange's pressers there last season. Obviously, it's his first season at the club. They lost Harry Kane on the eve of the season. Battled for a whole heavy list of injuries and suspensions, not to mention international absentees. When you look back now and you kind of reflect on the last 12 months, and this is at a point really where Spurs hired Ange at this point, Macca calling it over tier 1 over there. Dal, your thoughts on Ange in that first season? How do you think he got on?
I think he's been fantastic for the club. I think at a time when you needed somebody who was going to bring back some of the feel-good factor for the club, that's exactly what he did. He's a very down-to-earth fella. I remember right from the start saying that he was a fantastic fit for the club. He was an honest, down-to-earth guy, and he was very much listening to him talk and listening to the way that he was very open and fronted up on anything. It felt like speaking to another fan, basically. I love the fact that he arrived with something to prove because that dovetailed with the club as well. A lot of people didn't rate him because he'd come from Australian football, J-League football, being up in Scotland, and people were always writing him off. In the early press conference, he was always talking about how he can only do what people felt he couldn't do in order to prove himself. And very quickly, he did that. I think from that first season, I remember saying to you when Harry Kane left that I know a lot of people didn't agree with it, but I felt it was a good thing for him as a player and for you as a club as well, because I think there were too many players that had hidden behind Kane for a long time, and I think it was time for them to, in a way, in a footballing way, grow up, come of age, and that's what they did in those first 3-4 amazing months where you guys were scoring goals for fun, winning games, tearing teams up, and at one stage last season you were the highest scorers in the league. So the football was fantastic. I love that commitment to football. I loved, hello Joanne Mohammed, lovely to see you too. I loved the fact that I remember the interview that he did with Sky, and you were down to, I think it was 9 men against Chelsea, and everyone basically was suggesting that it was crazy to keep attacking. And I've always remembered, and I'm sure you guys have as well, when he said, that's who we are. And I've got a lot of Spurs mates who, when Conte and Mourinho was there, and I know some of the Spurs fans disagreed with me over this because I was a big fan in particular of Conte, and fans said even when he was winning games, this isn't Spurs. We don't want to grind wins out. We don't want to be this defensive. We want to express ourselves. The heart of Spurs and the soul of Spurs is expressing ourselves. But you can do that now under Postecoglou because that's the way that's who he is. That's who you are. And I love the fact that he's done that. So I'd say really, really good season. It would have been even much better if you hadn't had those horrific injuries mid-season. So good, strong finish as well. Now you've got the young players and a bit of depth this summer. I think this season could be quite interesting.
It's interesting, Dal, because I mean, again, with Spurs fans, look, we're a psychologically broken bunch to some degree, as everybody knows, with the lack of trophies over the last 20 years. I didn't mean to put the pun in there, but it came along with the actual wording there. So on my behalf, no regrets on that wording. I think it has been a difficult last 5, 6, 7 years. Because again, like you said it, we've been trying to find our identity again. And I think even to some now, have we completely found it? Some would say no. Are we on our way to find it? Some would say yes. But I think, again, that all depends on really maybe what Spurs do and how they do act in this transfer market. Because I know many at the moment are frustrated that we haven't yet seen any real prominent signings through the door. But again, we actually had this chat off there. You look at what other clubs have done. Really, no one has done any real huge amount of business at the moment in around the top 3, top 4 clubs. But of course, the focus will be from Spurs fans on Spurs, not what the other clubs are doing. But I think there is a real general feeling that Spurs do need to have, you'd argue, 2 or 3 real genuine first team players to maybe take Spurs to that next level. Macca, before I ask you actually about the upcoming, or previous training we just had, but obviously in the midst of now pre-season, what's your mood, Macca? You've had a couple of weeks off here. You look so much happier.
We've all had a few weeks off. It's been England duty, isn't it? I know you're not interested in England too much, Rick, but most of the nation were. And I think that, Gareth bows out on that England, some turgid football at times, but what he's done for the clubs, for the country in terms of England and getting to the finals and that sort of stuff has been heralded by many. So it's kind of a bit of England fever. But now we are, as you say, we are back to Spurs. It's interesting just picking up on a point that Darren made there about injuries. I see a graphic come through from one of our own, Christina, the other day in a WhatsApp group, and Man City, Fulham, and Arsenal had the least amount of Premier League injuries last year, 14. Which is still quite a lot, actually, 14. Tottenham had 22, which is the highest, which is unbelievable. I mean, Liverpool, just to throw them out there, because Liverpool, Brighton, Newcastle had some big ones as well, 20, 21, respectively. But Spurs had 22 injuries. And actually, you talk about 2 or 3 or maybe 3 or 4 big signings this summer coming in, hitting the first team. That's exactly what we did last year. I don't think, for our defensive record, was so poor last year. I think we conceded 61 goals in the Premier League last season. I don't think there'd be a Spurs fan on the planet, and I'm sure I'll be told, because there's a lot of people in the chat and on Twitter, feel free to at me, but I don't think there'd be anyone, Spurs fan, that would change our goalkeeper, our left back, our centre backs, or our right back, which I think is quite staggering, because I think that back 5 is, if you want to call it, can be and will be absolutely magnificent moving forward. So I think we've got a huge opportunity this season to improve on that goals against. And I think if you look at some of the trends that happens with the Premier League clubs that are building, when Klopp first came in, when Pep first came in, when Arteta first came in, they start to, yes, improve going forward. They do, but they start to improve. Exactly. Look at the graphic on the here now. That back five, I mean, you've got Dragusin in there as well. I was talking about the goalkeeper, but they are an upgrade in every position, I would suggest, that we have in the shadow, essentially. And you start to look at all of these teams that are starting to put together kind of, dare I say it, look, I'm going to say it, right, because that's who I am. I'm going to be true to myself. Title-winning teams. If you're starting to build a title-winning team, then what you start looking at is you start looking at the defence. You've got to, strikers, forwards, goals, win games, titles, win defences, and actually we've got to tighten that up. So I think there's probably 18, 19, 20 goals against that we can eradicate from our play. And that's hugely exciting to me, because if you go in the season, next season, 24-25, and only concede 40 goals, with the amount of goals that we got in his team, that's a top 3 side. And that's before we've even started to look at some big money names, which I know Darren and yourself want to get into as well. But you start to look at that, and I think that's the essence for me of building a team, building a world-class team, and not just putting in individuals and hoping. And I think that's the identity. People were saying in the comments, what identity? The identity of Ange Ball is 2.0 now. And I think everyone I've spoken to, John Grecian, who's done the biography of Ange, that we've had on the show multiple times, the people that are in and around Ange, people in and around the football club, Celtic, they all said the second season is something. I think, Darren, I'll fight back over to you. That's maybe what you was alluding to when you said there's a special season on the horizon. I'm hoping. Don't make me need to pray, Darren.
Not again. Well, the thing is, not praying again. Surely that's all we ever do on the show is pray.
I know.
Do you know the interesting thing about well, just in general? And I was talking off air to you, Lee, about this. I really enjoyed the European Championship final and Spain winning, because it was a really good lesson for all of us, not just for England fans, but for all of us who think that to show ambition, you have to go out and spend big money. You guys have been there before under Pochettino, when instead of going crazy and spending big money in those first couple of seasons, he promoted players from the academy and he gave them a chance. Harry Winks has never, ever looked the player he looked at Spurs since he left the club. Kane, obviously, we know what he did. There were so many other players who, once the pathway got opened up for them into the first team, they were terrific. But it's not just those players. I look around and I see potential players that you could get. And I agree with everything you said about that back five. I think they do look very strong, very settled. Although you may well start the season without Romero because he's been away at the Copa America. But Dragusin looked good at the Euros as well. Could you bring in maybe a player or two? Well, I think Tyrick Mitchell, he's got a year left at Crystal Palace. Would he want to stay there under Oliver Glasner? Looks like he's turning them into a serious team. Or would he want to make a step up and go to you guys? I think he could be a good signing for you at the right price. In terms of goal scoring, Jota, I think he's at Al Ittihad in Saudi. He's only 25 years of age, and I think he's a good player. He would be a good player for you. I think his numbers under Postecoglou at Celtic were ridiculous, something like 28 goals in 83 matches, and he's a terrific player. And the word seems to be that he wants to leave Al Ittihad because he hasn't quite settled there. I like the attacking midfielder Kyogo as well. 29, played for Postecoglou at Celtic. He probably wouldn't be a first teamer, but in terms of depth, because that's where you guys, when Maddison dropped off last season, who else was there to come in and really find those killer passes or score those goals or just bring it all together? And sometimes just put their foot on the ball and really start to run the game. So I think there are players out there that could improve you as a side and give you that depth. I know you want to talk about Ivan Toney a bit later, so I won't talk about him just yet. But the players are out there.
Oh, why want to talk about him later, Dale? Look at that. He's given a teaser. Can I ask you one thing? I will remember to ask
All right.
about Ivan Toney, just because it's in my mind. Now you've just rattled off a number of players there. Are you surprised that Ange, with all of his knowledge of the Asian market, me and Mac have actually had this chat off
we
there
had this
before.
conversation, didn't we, Vic?
We had this chat the other day,
I'm
Macca.
staggered.
Are you surprised now that he's not dipped his toes into that Asian market since he's been at Spurs? Or is it just a case that he's concerned about the level of players bringing them over to the Premier League?
No, I think it's easier to do that when you're at Celtic,
Right.
and you need to bring in quality than it is to do when you're in the Premier League. I think he has wanted to give players a chance. He has wanted to really get used to the pace of the Premier League himself. I think in theory, you could look at the theory and the reality, and you can look at the theory and say, look, could we bring in somebody from that league who's done well under me? And could they make the same impact at Spurs? And it might be that they wouldn't. And the other thing is that he's always said it's going to take 2 or 3 windows before you start to see my team. So we're into that 3rd window now. And that's why I'm a little bit optimistic on your behalf, because I think they'll see an opportunity. If you look at the Premier League now, Liverpool are in a state of transition. Newcastle are in a state of uncertainty. A couple of the big players there have gone. There's a little bit of conversation around Eddie Howe. Arsenal, I think, will be strong going into next season. But if they don't buy a striker, then, I mean, listen, they're not short of goals. And I know you don't like the A word on this show, so I won't talk too much about them. Chelsea, at the moment, you guys all know the story. I don't need to go into it. They are being ripped apart at the moment from nowhere. So there's an opportunity. I think Villa look very strong, done some very intelligent business.
Yeah, they have.
But for some clubs, some big clubs, it could be a season of transition. And it could be an opportunity for you guys, certainly, to be in that top 4 conversation, and maybe even, dare I say, to... Okay, move on.
No, I think, look, just coming on that, I know you want to move on, but like, I think the top 2 pick themselves. And actually, look, we don't like talking about Arsenal too much, but let's be fair about it. They are a very good team. They're very strong. They're on a good run of form. And I actually think this is a changing moment for them this season as well. If they don't win the Premier League this year, I think they start to lose some of their players the following year. I'm not saying they are. I know there's Arsenal fans in the chat right now. I'm not saying that. I think they're going to go close. So I think City and Arsenal are the top 2. And then I think it's anyone. I actually do. I think it's anyone out of all the clubs we've just talked about. Liverpool in transition, Chelsea are in a mess, Newcastle, we don't even know, is it going to be Poch as their manager? Is Eddie Howe going to stay? What's going to happen? There's huge amounts of change at the hierarchy in Newcastle, Dan Ashworth, etc., moving around. Manchester United just spanked 60 million on a teenager, which I know most people want us to go and spank another 80 million on a teenager, whatever it might be. You just don't know what's going to happen. But what you do know is that Ange is in his 2nd season, and all of the learnings that we had from season 1, it won't be any worse. So it won't be any worse than 5th. So I can only see us going higher. I know Rick wants Poch back. Obviously, he's gonna be like walking the plank.
I can't believe what he just heard there. You can see he looks like, what have I just heard?
A banter, but look, I mean, at the end of the day, I just can't see how it's going to be worse with a settle back, a back 4, with 𝐿𝐸𝐺𝐭 coming in, with the new signings. We've already got Archie Gray. I mean, Archie Gray played. I know we'll come on to this, but Archie Gray played centre back yesterday. He was absolutely magnificent. I know it's friendly, whatever. He was magnificent. He's 18. So,
Lee, can I ask you a question? Maybe, I know I can see in the chat we've got loads and loads of viewers at the moment, so maybe they can contribute to this as well. Would you, if you guys had £63 million, would you have dropped it on 18-year-old Lenny Yoro? Or would you have looked at other areas of the pitch, maybe a new striker, attacking midfielder, maybe a new defensive midfielder? I remember when you guys had Wanyama and Dembele to protect the back 4, and you were the strongest, meanest defense in the country. And I think if you get that protection again, you could be right back there.
I completely agree.
18 years old, £63 million. Are you having it?
No, I think we'll come on to this. I think there are other areas to improve. I mean, Lee Joverley says they're about maybe the concerns I've got around the manager. I think, Dow, look, we had a bit of a chat off air, 3-4 months ago, and we discussed that Arsenal fixture. It's the mood around the club at that time. It was a crazy, crazy week, that of the Arsenal game. And that's why I wanted to kind of bring into focus. I mean, look, you've been in a few of Ange's pressers. I think the way in which Spurs finished the season, they did go on to win back-to-back games, but of course they did lose 5 out of their last 7. And I think to try and bring a bit of fair balance, whilst there is genuine excitement about the second season, I also know a lot of fans that are maybe a bit concerned as well and apprehensive about the fact that maybe is the way Spurs want to play ultimately sustainable through the course of a season in terms of the players that they're going to have available to them and the calibre of that. I think when you are Pep Guardiola and you've got the players that you've got, that he's got the ambition to go and get and that he's got under his remit, you can play that way every single week and not really need to change. But my concern with Spurs is that I'm not sure whether we're able to sustainably play the way Ange wants us to play over the course of not just a 38-game Premier League season now. You've got FA Cup, you've got League Cup, you've got a Europa League campaign coming in.
Is that a little bit like Pocho? Is that a little bit like Klopp? Is that a little bit like when Klopp first come in? I mean, I'm long in the tooth, man. I'm too long in the tooth. Maybe I'm a bit cynical, but I see this with Klopp. Klopp came in and everyone went, "You can't do this high press stuff. That's not sustainable. You can't do that." It's only because it's different.
I think the only thing, Mac, I would say is that even with those managers, and I might be wrong here, and Dow, look, you tell me, you're more of an outsider looking in. I feel even with those managers, they had an ability to be able to tweak and not play the same way every week and be adaptable. And I'm not saying Ange hasn't been adaptable.
Season 2, Season 3, Season 4, not Season 1. You go back and look at the archives. They did not change Season 1. They didn't. They didn't change. Arteta's the same. Pep's the same. They have to drive a philosophy into the players. The minute, as a leader, the minute you say, "Oh, do you know what? I want to do it this way, but just for this once, I'm not going to," you've lost it. You've lost the way to lead. That is, and I'm pretty certain Ange knows what he's doing, and that's why I back it in that way. There came a point where Klopp didn't change his philosophy; he changed the players. And it actually came at Wembley. We smashed them 4-1. Dele Alli running rings around Lovren, Son scoring, Kane scoring, getting in behind. And then he went and bought a world-class centre-back in Virgil van Dijk, who probably is the best centre-back on the planet even today. And he bought a world-class goalkeeper, which, other than Vicario, of course, is probably the one of the best goalkeepers on the planet at the time. He didn't change the way he wanted to play, the high press, the high intensity. He just changed the players. That's exactly what Pep did. But, Joe Hart won the championship, the Premier League with Man City, and Pep walked in and went, "You ain't good enough. You can't play out from the back." He didn't change the way of, I'm going to accommodate Joe. He just got rid of him and brought somebody else in. And that's exactly the transition, in my opinion. Strong opinion, of course, but that's why I'm here. Yeah. That, in my opinion, is why Ange is going to succeed this year if he gets the players that he wants. Because I'm pretty certain that if he does, two inverted fullbacks, not one Pep, not one Arteta, 2, I think can work. The high line, I think, can work. Just heard it from the king himself. Darren said Villa look really strong. They play the high line. Would you call it, Rick? The high line derby earlier last season.
I think
it can work, 100%.
Don't use that one for your papers, Dow. A really bad one to use for the high line derby of Spurs Villa. But I mean, Dow, I just wonder from the outside looking in at Spurs last season, because again, we had that tremendous start, the 10 unbeaten, where I think we are all over-exceeded expectations in those first 10. It did feel at some points last season that Spurs were getting found out, weren't reacting quick enough. We, of course, conceded 14 goals from set pieces, which, again, was fairly alarming. You could say towards the end of that season that Spurs were getting back on top of that. But I know for some fans out there that as much as there's excitement under Ange for the second season, there is some concerns in terms of going into that second season of what to expect. And I think Lee's totally right. He does need to get the players in that ultimately believe in his philosophy and can turn the doubters into believers. We've already seen a change in the coaching staff there. He's getting a few more men around him that believe in the way he wants to play. But I just want to ask you, from the outside looking in, do you look at Ange's style and feel this is sustainable long-term in just really having the one way of playing and not really changing from that?
Well, I'm not sure that he does only have one way of playing. I think that we'll see different ways for him to play depending on who he buys this summer. Let's say, for argument's sake, he manages to get Ivan Toney. Well, the way that Ivan Toney likes to play is very similar to Harry Kane, dropping deep, allowing players to run in behind and being able to... He can play a pass, Ivan Toney. I've seen him do it many times. And I think given that Brentford must sell this summer, unless they want to lose him for free, and they don't want to do that. If they were to do that, I would imagine Spurs would be involved in that conversation. And that would give a little bit of variation to the way that they want to play. But I think it is sustainable. I have to say, I think a lot of people have come into the Premier League and wanted to play a certain way, and people have maybe scoffed at them a bit. I remember when Pep had that conversation around tackling, and people said, no, this is a Premier League, don't be bringing that here. And, you know, how many Premier League titles later? 6 in the last 7, is it? And I remember as the gegenpressing that under Klopp that he succeeded with at Dortmund, wanted to bring it into this country, and people, again, looked at it and said, no, he can't do that. It's too much. It's too much of an effect on the players. But he made it work with the right players. And I think that's what Postecoglou will look to do with you guys. He'll look to bring in the right players to play the system, to provide the depth. You've got good young players at the club, good young English players, and they'll come in. Just the last thing on this, for now anyway. Before the show, I was talking to Lee about the Spain team, and I had a bit of an argument with a friend of mine ahead of the final, because I was saying, would you rather have a top striker in a middling to average system, or would you rather have an average striker in a good system? Because Morata probably wouldn't get in your first team, would he? And he certainly wouldn't get into the England squad. But the the Spain system works for him, because they all work for each other. And that's what I see at Spurs right now, a team that works for each other, a team where your back five is strong. I looked at your first game in pre-season. I even saw Jed Spence playing a couple of decent passes, making it into the box to turn home the winner. I'm seeing a very different Jed Spence, and I'm thinking to myself, is he going to go, or could he stay, provide a little bit of depth? Is he coming of age? I'm optimistic for you guys, because I think that he will bring in the players, see an opportunity and take it. And I don't think it's about buying expensive players this time around. I think it's about being very clever and looking to bring in the right players that are going to be right for the system. And if you do that, I think you can do anything you want this season.
Can I ask you, Dal, only because you mentioned Ivan Toney, let's maybe stick with him for just a second. I've watched you, had the pleasure of interviewing him as well, I think a couple of times, not just the once. I think there is feelings in around the Spurs fan base that, look, we've been here before with certain players where we've let them in, got emotionally, you'd say, comforted to certain players, got protected certain players, and they've let us down and used us as a stepping stone. I'm not suggesting that Ivan is like that, but I think there's a concern around Ivan that he's maybe set the barrier in terms of what he wants as his football club. I think he's been quite public at times in terms of saying where he would like to go. From just an attitude perspective, again, I know it's hard to maybe ask you, you're just interviewing him, but what did you take away from meeting him in person in terms of the player and profile that he is? Could you see him fitting in around a club that he's looking to build towards something rather than being there right now to win? Because it does feel from the outside looking in, I don't want to prejudge the guy, I don't know him, that he's someone that wants to go somewhere with the ability to win now. You tell me if that's fair or not.
I think he's got a point to prove, because he's 29 years of age. So the club that he goes to next is not going to be a stepping stone. It's going to be a club where he's going to be able to make an impact. I think there are one or two people that maybe don't rate him, and he'll want to prove those people wrong, because his record over the last 3 seasons has been outstanding. But I still think there are people who don't think he can make the step up. Now, at the time when both of those this is the club that Ollie Watkins stepped up from and has turned into a penalty box player and have been sensational for Aston Villa. And the nation were cheering the other day. And I look at Toney, and I look at his aerial ability. I look at his ability to pick a pass. I look at everybody knows about his ability from the spot. His movement inside the box is excellent as well. He's got a skill set on him. And I think he is very keen to put himself in a situation where the club he joins is the club that he'll make an impact for. And I don't think he'll want to go elsewhere. I think he would want to help a Tottenham, for argument's sake, into the Champions League. He would want to be playing Champions League with a Tottenham. I think he could easily give you a good 3-4 years in a Tottenham shirt, and he would give you the depth that you need, but also the variation of play that you need. And yeah, like I said before, you can see a set of circumstances where he's dropping deep. Brennan Johnson and Timo Werner, or Brennan Johnson or Son, are running in behind, and you guys are scoring goals. Or maybe he's coming from deep to tuck one away late inside the box. He's a terrific player, and I think he'd be a really good signing for you guys if you were to sign him.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because again, I mean, it's one that, from what we've heard reports-wise, Spurs have distanced themselves on. Can you just see have interest now with that potential player? Can you see it running towards the end of the window, or do you feel it will be a player that will ultimately be snapped up before the league does start in your mind? Have you got like a gut feel on that one?
I do actually, because I think that given that his contract is running down, it's the buyer's market. And I think as far as Brentford are concerned, personally, I would have taken the money a year ago. But they dug their heels in and said they didn't want to sell, and now they're in no position to determine how much he goes for. And I think if a club waits late and comes in maybe with a couple of weeks, a week to go, there isn't really anything that Brentford could do, because if they don't sell, then he can talk to whoever he likes in January. So yeah, I think everyone is taking, shall we say, a negotiating position, but we'll see where they are come the last few weeks of August.
Interesting.
That sounds perfect for Daniel Levy.
The old Daniel Levy, not the new one. The old Daniel Levy.
The old Daniel Levy. He'd be loving that. Last minute negotiations.
No, you guys are not that club anymore. I think you guys, I have to say, the recruitment at Tottenham right now is first class. I look at the players you signed. You were decisive about bringing in a new goalkeeper, a left-sided centre-half, who I'm amazed didn't play more football at the Euros, but obviously that's to your benefit. You were decisive about bringing back Destiny Udogie. He's done terrifically well and really impressed a lot of people. He's injured at the moment. I'm not quite sure when he's back, but you guys, everyone watching, you all know his quality. Yep. Brennan, I have to admit something here. I thought £45 million for Brennan Johnson was a lot of money, but he looks at every inch a Spurs player.
This guy, Darren, just sorry to interrupt you, the king, but he is going to be a baller. I'm telling this guy, like, there's haters out there for Brennan Johnson. I don't know why. There'll be people listening to me right now going, you ain't got a clue what you're talking about, McQueen. Yeah. What are you on about? You watch. I bet he is in top echelon double figures of goals this year. I bet he is. I bet he scores 17, 18, 19 Premier League goals. The bloke's got it. And I can't wait to see it. I cannot wait for him to see it. There's nothing better than seeing somebody smash it. And I think he's going to do it.
See, again, I mean, and maybe if there's anyone watching now who wants to say what there's not to like, because he's versatile, he can play on either side, his timing is fantastic, he arrives late, he's got that composure in the box, he's got that pace to get in behind, he is a very intelligent footballer, and honestly, me, one of life's big cynics, I thought to myself, that's a lot of money, but he's made that step up so well, and you can see exactly why Postecoglou wanted to buy him. You could see why the club agreed on the expenditure. You could see what he could do for the club. And I agree with you. He scored the first goal of your preseason. He could end up scoring another 20 during the regular season. And
he scored a hat-trick against Cambridge in a behind closed doors. Sorry to interrupt. He scored a hat-trick against Cambridge. Well.
I just wonder, it's really interesting. It's really interesting because, again, I think, Dow, you brought him up there to begin with. It's, again, interesting because, again, a lot of Spurs fans, I felt, unjustifiably went really hard on him last season. I actually made this point in the show we did last night. I think the plan for Johnson is, and maybe Dale, if you feel the same, you tell me as well. I don't think there was ever going to be a situation where Johnson was going to play anywhere near the amount of games he played last season, but it was forced upon him due to the injuries Spurs sustained. They lost 4 players against Chelsea, and then suddenly Johnson finds himself in a side that, let's be honest about it, he's adapting to going from a Nottingham Forest, with no disrespect, to a Tottenham. 2 clubs with, at the moment, I know, again, Forest are a massive football club, 2 completely different types of aspirations. And I think, again, maybe it would be the best thing for him to have had and gone through that experience last season, because he was thrown in the deep end to some degree in footballing terms, and having to really, adjust and change. And again, do this at the same time of getting to know new teammates, a new system, a new way of playing under Ange Postecoglou. So look, I think you look at players like that, and you might be right, Macca. He might be one of those surprise players of the seasons where I agree he could easily rack up 20 G&As, next season. I think he has got that ability. He's had a decent start to pre-season for sure.
He got 15 this season. Last season, he got 15 last season. This is the thing. Like, he got 10 assists. He got 5 goals and 10 assists. And there's Caleb H254 in the chat saying he's like, he underperformed his XG, which I don't really understand. But he underperformed his XG by 5. So in other words, like, he should have been scoring 10 goals. And some people will say, well, he didn't score them, so he must be bad. But he's just going to improve. The whole point you've just made, Vic, is just, this is why I'm so excited about this season. And I can get carried away. I can do what I like because I'm a Spurs fan, and that's what I want to do.
And you're Lee McQueen. Come on,
I'm Lee McQueen. I do what I like, right? No, but if I want to get carried away, I just think the optimism of going into a new season. If you're already going into a season in any walk of life, team, you're all my team, right? All of you watching, listening, right? If you go into any walk of life thinking it's not going to happen, it's not going to happen, you're not going to happen, it's not going. What is the point? Like, what is the point? You have to go into the new season thinking, we're going to do something well, we're going to get go. You've got to look forward to something. Otherwise, you're just going to walk through life with your head down and just a droopy, miserable sod. And that's what is the point? You know what I mean? Like, you want to be happy and try and go for it. Then, after about 3 or 4 weeks of watching Spurs getting absolutely tonked, then you can be miserable, right?
And then you can call for the manager to change.
Then you can sack the manager, right? But before the season starts,
but at least going positive. Come on. Look, what we are going to do, we are going to quickly squeeze in our first break of the show for our listeners all there. We've got over nearly 3,500 of you watching us live. Look, as always, thank you so much for all your incredible support for the show. I'm joined by the crazy instructor, conductor, the runner, Lee McQueen, and we're joined by, for us, he's journalist royalty, right? We have the pleasure of bringing him on twice a season if we're lucky. And we grace those minutes ever so clenchly with our fists and absolutely enjoy every minute of them. We're joined by the wonderful Darren Lewis from The Mirror. And like I say, Dale, look, people love listening to you. It's Saturdays, Sundays, Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays. You get around these days, Dale. So we love seeing you on our screens. And not just on Spurs, but in general, like I say, I think many hold your footballing opinions so highly, which again, for us, is why we love having you on this show. Lee mentioned there about the preseason game. Just quickly touch upon that, and I might ask you about a few players that we've got. I mean, look, Spurs, they kicked off their preseason in really thumping style to some degree, a 5-1 victory over Hearts. It was the same scoreline all those years ago under Harry and co that many will remember. Of course, Spurs, they took the lead by 1-0. It was Brennan Johnson on the score sheet. We then subsequently had 11 changes made at the break. Emerson Royale, inside a minute, showed us why Emerson Royale is looking for a move at the moment by horrendously giving away a ball, which saw Hearts incidentally equalise. And then really, it was Spurs' youngsters that really put on a show. We had the likes of Mikey Moore on the score sheet. We had, of course, Will Lancashire as well. Archie Gray, one of the most positive players coming out of that as well. And I think that overall, there'll be the takeaways that there's some really genuine hope for the future when it comes to the youth. And that's what I wanted to ask you, if I can, Dale, quickly before I go over to Lee before this, that Dale, there is some real abundance of youth coming through with Spurs, which I think, again, points towards the future. I mean, you'll remember all those years ago when the likes of Harry Kane broke through to this team at a point where you had the likes of Mason, you had Ben Slib at the time under Maurizio Pochettino, all these youngsters coming through. There was such high hope, such high energy that youth side was going to carry Spurs. And to be fair, it did. Macca will tell you, Spurs involved in a couple of title changes under Maurizio Pochettino. There was an energy to the side. There was a burning desire about them. There was a fearlessness about that side now. And to be fair, you touched upon the recruitment, what Spurs have done over the course of the last 12, 18 months. They have invested in the youth. It is Pat Matissar, the likes of Archie Gray, Lucas Bergvall, Jamie Donnelly coming through, Ashley Phillips, Tyrese Hall, Mikey Moore. How excited should we be, Dow, about what Spurs are doing in terms of the youth coming through? Because there is some real exciting prospects in there. And again, is it just a reminder that whilst you can have all these youth players coming through, you've got to sprinkle that with a little bit of experience? What's your feelings on it for you, Dow?
Yeah, I do think that you need to bring in a bit of experience. I mean, I'm going to temper what I'm about to say with the fact that, as you guys know, I've covered you guys for the best part of 20 years, and I've seen some good, promising young players come through, or you sign them. I remember Johnny Blondell. I think he was 18, if I'm not mistaken. He was a midfielder.
We're still getting therapy for that signing, Dow.
He went to Bruges and spent the rest of his career there. I remember Johnny Bostock. He was 15.
Yeah, massive potential. Johnny Bostock. We were speaking about him last night, actually. Incredible, right? That kind of the rise of what you were expecting with John Bostock. It's never actually happened.
Yeah. And I think there are a lot of reasons for that. I think at Spurs were maybe hoovering up young players, but possibly weren't in the shape that you're in now to make sure that they get the football in education and the guidance that has enabled you guys to kind of bring through good players and open up that pathway. I remember even like Cameron Lancaster. I wouldn't put Marcus Edwards in the same thing because I think the circumstances of Marcus Edwards are a little bit different. And but I look at all of the players that you guys have got, and of the ones I really, really like, I love Bergvall's passing range. Very confident passer, receives the ball in tight spaces, doesn't panic, manages to pick a pass, manages to really enjoy himself on the ball. He's got a real confidence about him, and I like what I'm seeing so far. I looked at the goals scored by Lancashire.
Yep.
I hope I pronounced that correctly.
You have, yep.
And there was a little touch of Harry Kane about that diagonal ball into the bottom right-hand corner, the way he tucked that away. I like that. And again, I like his confidence and his composure. Even more so, Mikey Moore, considering his age. He had 3 players in front of him, collected the ball inside the box. And again, he was able to find the bottom corner, didn't panic, even though, those players and the goalkeeper kind of closing in on him. It's very, very early days, of course. I mean, I regard preseason matches as training exercises. And I've seen some players, some clubs do well in preseason and stink the place out during the season. I've seen some clubs stink the place out during preseason and do really well in the regular season. So it's very, very early days. But I think the signs are good for these young players. And I was quite fascinated to see that Postecoglou said that he's bought them to play. He's bought them to be part of what you guys are trying to do. But I don't see them as starters. I think I see a lot of them as maybe sort of last 15 minutes of games. Maybe in the League Cup, taking a role in those games as well. And just giving you that kind of depth. But they do look exciting. And I think as long as we have that little rider, remember Cameron Lancaster as well? Loads of people were raving about him when he was in the academy age with Harry Kane. And again, not quite. I think he's in Canada at the moment. So you've got to temper it, but you do have some really good reasons to be excited about this season.
Yeah, you know what? Mac, if I can bring you in there. I mean, Dow politely reminding us our preseason doesn't mean a thing. You'll remember, Macca, in that famous season where we went the whole preseason unbeaten. We stuck 5 past AS Roma at the time. Bentley put in one in the top corner. And then, of course, Ramos making the horrific start and Harry reminding us constantly it was 2 points from 8 games that he walked into. On the back of a preseason where you thought, how is this happening? We've just smashed Roma 5-0 at home, 5-1 at home. David Bentley scoring 3 kicks. Everything's looking so great. And then just Spurs happen. I mean, is that a reminder, Mac? Again, I'll ask you, it was great that result in pre-season. Again, Benny will take comfort from that. But just a reminder, as Dow says there, pre-season is just about fitness more than maybe results at this stage. Is that fair to say, Macca?
Yeah, of course it is. I think, look, no one's getting, even me, Rick's not getting carried away with a 5-1 win over Hearts. But, I mean, if you can't get a little bit excited about one of your own, 2 of your own, 3 of your own coming through, this is what it is about. You know, for me, the academy has two phases, if you like. first phase is to try and get a pathway through to the first team, to get the next generational talent, the next Harry Kane, the next superstar coming through the ranks at Spurs, the next Ledley King. I mean, there is nothing better than one of your own coming through the club and watching them play in the first team. You know, Trent Alexander-Arnold, the Steven Gerrard, the Harry Kanes, the Ledley Kings, you know, on and on. Well, I do find it quite funny since social media, and I say social media because I think the social media fans are different to fans that go week in, week out. And that's not a jibe. That's not a jib at them. It's just that they are different now. You know, I do find it interesting that you know, you mentioned Darren, Harry Winks earlier has never been the same player since he left. He's had a great season for Leicester in the Championship, but the grief that boy got, you know, as he is one of our own, he'd been at the football club since he was 8 years old. You know, same now, Skippy. Skippy's getting a lot of grief now. Like, get rid of him. He's not good enough. This, that, and the other. And I think that's born out of frustration. I don't want to talk from everyone's point of view because they've got their own views and values. But I think, you know, I interact with a lot of Spurs fans, and I think it's probably a frustration that the club as a whole, under this ownership for 23, 24 years, has won one trophy. And, you know, and that's maybe what's changed as well as the social media aspect. But whatever, right, it is definitely changed. But I do think that, you know, seeing these young lads coming through the academy, signing on the dotted line when they were, you know, when they were eligible. You know, Mikey Moore's not even been able to sign a full professional contract yet because he's not old enough. Yep. You know, people saying, "Oh, get him out on loan." He can't go out on loan. He's not old enough to go even out on loan. But so to be able to have a look at that and see them come through, I think it's wonderful. I think it's brilliant. These local young lads that have been at the club and now they're making the first team. The second phase for the academy is to recognise very quickly or early that they're not going to make it, unfortunately, and football is cruel and it can be very harsh. But then you go and sell them on. And you go and sell them on. At the moment, the trend is to sell teenagers for big money. Now, I'm not suggesting we go and sell Mikey Moore or any of these lads, but if you know they're not going to make it into the first team, that's where you start to recoup some of the key money. And that's where an academy's function, in my opinion, just my opinion, the two-phase of function is bring them to the first team or get some good money for them. And people say, well, you know, what's good money? Well, if you're getting 8 million, 5 million, 4 million, 7 million, 12 million for an academy player, that's good money, right? Depending on their level. If you go and do that 3, 4, 5 times every season and, you know, the conveyor belt keeps running, that's when you can start to fuel some bigger money signings as well. And that's where it becomes self-sustainable. So I think it's mega exciting. And actually the fact that, does it mean anything, Darren, Ricky, you know, viewers and listeners, that we won the Premier League 2 and then obviously we won the playoffs as well? Does it mean anything? Well, I think it does to Spurs because we don't win much. So I think that for us to have a look at that and then see 4, 5, 6 of these lads that are starting to step up I think that's significant, to be honest. And I'm looking forward to seeing how they progress. The other thing I will quickly say on this is that we can't have it both ways. You can't say, I want to go and win the Europa League, right? And then play the first team in the Europa League and then not drop any of the first team in the Premier League game, as Jason always articulates this brilliantly. And then, because then you're then blocking the pathway for the squad. So then if you then play the, inverted commas, kids in the Europa League, half the people will say that you were not taking it seriously. So there has to be a balance. And I think that's why that integration of 2 or 3, maybe 3 or 4 in the squad across the season is so important. Does that make sense, Wick?
Absolutely. And I want to ask Dal that point, actually. You know, you said there at the start, Dal, not to hold you to it. Please, I think I'm going to hold you to it. You said special in terms of a special season being the second season. How do you think Ange is going to cope with, as Lee has brought up there, the European football? Spurs have got 9 games where they even actually start in terms of getting through to that next inaugural round of the Europa League. How do you see them coping, balancing? We've seen it before with previous managers, the Thursday to Sunday, as we know, having big matches on the Sunday to then focus your mind on what could be a big match in the Europa League on the Thursday. How do you see Ange coping on that, on the basis that really, when you look at last season, we had that incredible start, but even with that more time on the training ground, through the midpoint of the season, we had a few dips. So I wonder, how do you see that working out if we don't strengthen in the areas that we need to?
Well, I think if you look at a club like Liverpool, who obviously went all the way to the end of the line in 1 or 2 competitions, they use their young players. If you look at the kudos they got, for example, when they're effectively half their team was from the youth team that beat Chelsea. And I know a lot of people were very unfair to Chelsea, the big old £1 billion bottle jobs thing and all that. But the fact was that the kids came in and the kids benefited from the confidence that the manager had in them. And I keep mentioning the Spurs team, but I keep saying Spurs instead of Spain. Goodness me. But De La Fuentes is very open about the fact that he likes to draw on young talent. And you are a club that gives young talent a chance. And I think in the League Cup, in the Europa League, I think you will use some of the younger players. I think you will use the squad players. I know one or two people in the comments aren't having an Ivan Toney, but you bring him in and it means that you're not flogging the living daylights out of a Richarlison if he were to stay, or a Son in the Europa League, because you have the depth to be able to start a player on a Thursday and then keep your first teamer fresh for the Sunday. And that is the kind of sensible approach that you've got to use. I look at Aston Villa and the number of signings that they've already made so far this season for the Champions League, because Unai Emery is so experienced at getting to the business end of European competitions.
Yep.
He did it with Villarreal after he got them into a top four. He got them into a Champions League final. He won the UEFA Cup and Europa League with Sevilla. Yep. And how does he do it? He manages. He takes these competitions seriously and he manages both competitions. And I can see Spurs doing that this season. I think there's kind of English thing about fighting really hard to get into the Europa League and then throwing it away.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think that, to be fair with Tottenham, I think that's been the problem the last 10 years when Spurs have been involved in the Europa League. I think, I'm not saying all fans, but some fans have looked down on the competition because there's been always this desperation to get to the Champions League. And I'll be honest with you, I think that is set, and I might be wrong after that, is set by the hierarchy. I think the hierarchy feeling is that top four is the ultimate aim. And at a point where that is in danger, we've seen it before, when Maurizio left the football club, you'd say when Conte left the football club, when top four becomes in danger of slipping away, Spurs tend to, history tells you, make a change managerial-wise. And I think, again, this is going to be really, really telling. They've given Ange, a 3-4 year contract. So it will be telling to see if Spurs are progressing in the relative cup competitions and not doing so well in the league, how they would manifest and manage that. But at the same time, look, they could have a really decent start to the season in terms of, fixtures-wise and play teams off the park. But I think it'll be really interesting to see how we navigate it this season, because you mentioned it there. That adaptation from Thursday to Sunday, it's not easy. That is not easy when you're looking to recruit right players for your right squad. You're still getting your feet under the table. We've said it before on here that Ange is working still with players from the last 3-4 managers. That's how crazy it is at Tottenham.
Do you know what, as well, Rick, on that, and Darren, is that we were, when Antonio Conte was in charge of our football club, we all knew, and he knew as well, that his European record as a manager, his domestic record as a manager is absolute first class. He's an amazing manager, absolutely superb. But his European record as a manager isn't great, to be fair. And we kind of all knew that coming in. Even, he's managed some absolute giants in Europe and not done brilliantly. And I remember when it was the whole COVID thing, it wasn't actually our fault getting knocked out. It's classic Spurs, isn't it? Like, we had to abandon the game or forfeit the game or whatever.
Got disqualified.
They got disqualified for having COVID. I mean, thanks. But anyway, like, little old Spurs, whatever. And I remember Conte coming out and saying, we're going to relish this because it means I get more time on a training ground and we play one game a week. And everyone was like, yeah, when he played one game with Chelsea, he won the league. And it was like, we were kind of not brainwashed, but every opportunity Conte had, he would tell us that. Like, as the manager of our club, as the voice of our club, yeah, we want one game. I thought it was very, very interesting when Ange was asked the same question last season. Oh, it was great, right? You've only got one. He was like, no, I want to play more. I want 2 games. I want to play in Europe. I thought, again, just the two things I found of interesting, the mentality-wise of how that's shifted, how that's different, and the fact that he's hungry for wanting to play 58, 60, dare I say it, 67 games a season, because he wants that time And I suppose, Darren, you've been around football long enough and around all of the game to know better than myself and Rick, to be fair, around kind of, you don't get much time on the training ground when you're playing Thursdays and Sundays and Thursdays, or Wednesdays and Saturdays for that matter. But they seem to relish that, don't they? That's their job.
Well, again, I use Liverpool as the example, and I'll use them again because what Liverpool were able to do in those seasons when they challenge on so many fronts is build up a momentum. And when you are going from competition to competition, everyone's buzzing. The first team, the squad players, the young players who are going to get an opportunity. You mentioned winning PL2, but and whether it means anything, well, yeah, because you want to establish a culture of winning within the football club. And you want it to go from the kids all the way up to the first team. When you look at De La Fuentes in Spain, and it is Spain I'm talking about, not Spurs.
Don't get those two mixed up now. That could cause a writer's nightmare. Spain and Spurs. Please God, one day, please God.
He won the under-19 tournament. I think with the under-17s, he won the under-21s as well. And then he got the Nations League, and a lot of the players that he won the Nations League with, he took into the senior team, and he's won the European Championship. And that whole culture of winning that he's managed to establish, you know what he did? He got rid of a lot of the senior players, a little bit like what Pochettino and Jesus Perez did when they came to the club, and they saw the likes of Soldado and Adebayor and all the other guys who had been at the club for a long time, but had that period of underachievement. He said, enough, I'm not going to try and get any more out of them. I'm going to look at the academy, and I'm going to get players in who are really hungry to do something. And all those players you put on the screen a second ago, they're all hungry to make an impact. I look at players like Toney. I know people aren't having him. He's hungry to make an impact because of people who doubt him. I look at some of the other players that you as a club that are looking at, and they are players who want to take the step up. They want to get into the Premier League. They want to prove themselves. And I think when you've got that hunger driving the momentum that you're trying to build up, you want to achieve something. And I think in particular, Ange wants to prove something as well, because he's got those people who doubt him and say, because he's come from so-called weaker leagues, he can't do it. Yep. And I think he's really, really desperate to prove a lot of people wrong. And that's why I think it's going to be a really interesting season for you guys.
I want to ask you, Dad, if we can, about some key players, some that may be heading out the door that maybe aren't now necessarily, and some that maybe might be an interest to Spurs. I want to ask you about Jed Spence. You brought him up earlier. And I think for Jed, look, at the point of when he moved to Spurs, there was this real hope and belief that we've got a guy here that was going to spend his next 4 or 5 years at the club and ultimately be a club that would grow and develop him into what was going to be one of the best young defenders in the league. It hasn't, unfortunately, worked out that way yet. I want to say that word yet, because again, with players, we can all be surprised. Players can always change. There's no rule book about what a player can and can go on to achieve. But in relation to Jed, it was quite interesting. I answered about him last night. We discussed, obviously, how well he played in the cameo he got under, obviously, Ange in that preseason game against Hearts. He said, look, Jed did well. He's had a tough couple of years. He's training with us. And I think of all the players, when they are here with us, I treat them as Tottenham players. Unless something changes, I will obviously play him as a Spurs player. He was good. He took his goal well. He contributed well and got an assist. Now, we understand in recent weeks that there has been these talks with Genoa, but at the moment, from what we're hearing, is that a move is unlikely at this stage due to the clubs, in terms of Spurs and Genoa, struggling to agree a fee. Can you see a possibility where Jed can reacclimatise himself at Spurs and refocus his mind to be a Tottenham player? Because there's no doubt about it. You don't just lose the ability that he got at the time when Spurs were looking to buy him. So I know it's early on. It's only the first game of pre-season, but what do you think the future holds for Jed? Can you see a redemption for him at Tottenham?
It's interesting you asked me that, because I was thinking about, I mentioned Harry Winks a while ago. Yep. And I remember coming in for one of the first press conferences of that season. So I think it was the 2017-18 season, possibly. Correct. You can correct me if I'm wrong, because the story I'm about to tell you will probably. But I remember saying, going into Spurs Lodge and talking to somebody, and that somebody was raving about Winks and saying, in this preseason, he's been tremendous. Some of the games you've seen, some of the games you really haven't seen. but I know that the manager's really been impressed with his application in this preseason, and he's going to do something. We think they're definitely thinking about him for the first team squad, and that was the season that obviously he went in and he did so well that later in the campaign, I don't know if you remember this, but you guys played somebody at Wembley. It was the Wembley season, and you had Real Madrid away in midweek.
Yep.
And a few of us, well, we were standing by Pochettino with our tape recorders asking who was going to play in his midfield. And he said, Harry's going to start in midfield. And we were like looking at each other thinking, he's having us on. He's not going to start Harry Winks against Real Madrid on Wednesday. And he did, because Winks had impressed him that much. Now, all of that is not to necessarily say that Jed Spence is going to start and he's going to be amazing or whatever else. But it's so early in pre-season, and he really has a chance to maybe change a few minds about what the future could be for him if he were to continue playing the way he has been playing. Because he's a good player. And you would not have invested as much money in him as you have done if you didn't see something in him.
Yeah, I mean, Macca, you always speak about it, don't you, Macca? You always, to be fair, say in pre-season, this is about an opportunity, and it's about taking an opportunity.
Yeah, of course it is. And you've got to ask a question, haven't you? You've got to put a question mark in. I can't remember who it was, so I can't give you a shout out. Sorry, but Europa League, Darren, you referenced earlier when Poch came in, Jesus came in, the coaching staff, and they were looking at Adebayor and Soldado and whatever. And Harry Kane got his chance in the Europa League, and he made his. And then all of a sudden he started scoring goals. And I remember we were in the terraces going, "Where's Harry Kane? Why isn't he starting in the Premier League? We need him." Everyone was saying we need him. And then he started, and once he started, he never came out of the team. He never once came. He just stayed in the team. And just quickly, a bit of a jovial one for you on the Harry Winks piece. I was in the Bernabeu, so I went to that game into the Bernabeu, and Harry Winks, obviously you're right, he did start, and he was absolutely outstanding. I mean, he ran the game. We got a 1-1 draw against the Bernabeu, and he was brilliant that game. So I remember all of us coming out the Bernabeu, very, very high up at the Bernabeu, and you've got this screen in front of you, mesh or whatever, and we're coming out the Bernabeu going, did we just see Harry Winks do that? It was incredible, absolutely incredible moment.
Yeah, it's a polite reminder that players can surprise you, and when those are doubted, have got something in their locker that maybe some doubted. One player that I think many feel maybe is the right time for him to move on. I think again last night didn't really do him any favours. I think both for himself and clubs maybe looking at him is that of Emerson Royale. I think Emerson, look, it's been tough for him at periods of Spurs. I felt at one point really uncomfortable seeing him being booed by our own fans, and that's tough. I mean, for any player to have to go through that is not easy. And I think the biggest compliment I can pay that guy is to have the strength of character to not only deal with that, but to get through it and then come out the other side and actually produce some decent performances in that period was actually quite remarkable. Many will just say, well, look, he's just not good enough. But sometimes that's not the player's fault. And also remember, a manager's got to pick a player. The player is being picked by the manager. So at the end of the day, it's very easy to turn around and say, Emerson's not good enough, but he's been asked to do a job that maybe he didn't want to do. I think we all recognise the fact that Emerson Royale for the right league, for the right club, will be a good player. I think there's no doubt about that. Again, a player that has been at Barcelona. You don't play for Barcelona or be picked up by Barcelona if you're a bad player. Do you think in the interest of Spurs and the relevant suitors out there that this move should be done really as soon as possible and allow the player to get a fresh start elsewhere?
Yeah, I do. I mean, listen, he looked better at times than we thought before Postecoglou came in. But I'd expect them to upgrade in that position, or maybe even give Jed Spence a chance. It's very, very early days, of course. But I think that Royale does need a fresh start in another league to hear another voice. I will say, I think there were times under Postecoglou when he did look like a player, and at times he played on the left instead of the right fullback, and it was okay, actually. The season before, not so much. And I'm being very diplomatic when I say that, but I do think that he needs a fresh start. And it's a shame it hasn't quite worked out, because there was a big fanfare when he arrived, but he's not I don't think, the future for Spurs. And listen, Lee, you talked about Liverpool when Klopp arrived. The side that he ended up with going on to win silverware was nothing like the side that he inherited. And I think that's going to be very similar with Postecoglou.
Yeah, you know, Maka, just to bring you in, I mean, look, we are hearing rumours constantly about Pierre-Emile Højbjerg, again, a player that is still in and around the Spurs camp. Obviously, yet to report back to pre-season because, again, obviously, he was the Danish team, and there'll be a situation where, again, you're probably looking at around a couple of weeks' time before he does need to report back. We've heard reports this week that Fulham is back on their radar. There was a point, obviously, where Fulham were looking at Højbjerg, but I think maybe the player would like to have a move to a more, how can I put this, a more higher caliber club. We'll wait to see what happens with him. But I want to ask you, Lee, have you got any concern about maybe losing some of the experience around the team? We've discussed about all these youngsters coming through, but no, there are rumours around the likes of if Bentancur will play again for Spurs, given the nature of his summer. Højbjerg, again, a player that was brought on by Ange in that last kind of 20, 25 minutes at the start of the season. Have you got any concern, Lee, about losing experience in and around the squad? And is that an area you will need to see addressed between now and the end of the window to give you the confidence that whilst we've got a lot of great youngsters coming through, we all know we need that experience in any squad to really get you over the line in those big games that we're going to have this season?
It's a really good point, mate, to be fair. I haven't really thought about it in that way. Like, getting excited about the youngsters, yes, but then you think, well, hang on, there is going to be games and times throughout the season where you do need that experience, and that is key. And you only get experience by gaining experience and playing, and that's no one's fault, right? That is just the reality. I think with Højbjerg, I absolutely think it's the time for him to go. What I will say about Højbjerg, I've got a bit of a man crush on him. I've said it before. There's one thing about him, right? He's never injured, the guy.
Always available. Always available.
Pete Sims already said in the comments that he knows I've got a soft spot for him, but he's always available. And I think that when we're looking at players like Richarlison, who hasn't been available all the time, let's be fair. When you look at Maddison, and Darren made the point earlier, when Maddison was injured for 3 months, who did we have? You know, Van de Ven was injured for 3 months. We're looking at players like Pedro Neto, whose injury record is absolutely abysmal. And actually, when you look at it, I'm not saying he's a bad player. He's 24 years old, 111 appearances in the Premier League. His statistics are worse, right? Yeah, like, go and have a look. They're worse than Brennan Johnson's, right? And and we just talked about Brennan Johnson, who still gets a lot of hate, and everyone wants a bit of Pedro Neto for 65 million. So I think with Højbjerg, there's one thing that a club's going to get from him he's not even an honest and reliable player. He's better than that. And no offense to Fulham,
for the right club, for the right club, he'll be great. Højbjerg. I maintain that for the right club.
I think for the right football, I think he's a brilliant player for it. It just doesn't fit our system and not the right player for us. But, you know, there's a lot to be said. And that sounds so basic. There's a lot to be said about being fit, isn't there? Like, if you can only be fit for 15, 20 games a season, I'd say that's a problem, no? Would you not agree, lads?
Well, we've seen it, haven't we? And Ndombele, Lo Celso, we've seen it. Yeah.
Exactly.
You know, one player I want to ask you about, Dow, is Jacob Ramsey. You've been quite complimentary of Villa so far in this show, and rightly so. Villa, of course, have got into the Champions League. They have improved the squad. Emery's a man that knows how to win cup finals, knows how to navigate teams throughout the season. I just wonder what you think of the outside looking at someone like Jacob Ramsey. You know, again, I think at the start of the window, there was this thing around maybe Villa needing to sell. That seems to have subsided to some degree now. I mean, there's this price in around Ramsey's head that it's led to believe an offer of around 50 million would prize him away. I mean, do you look at Jacob Ramsey at the moment from what you see even on potential being worth a £50 million player? And would you be surprised if Spurs did make that move for the player? Well, we know also the fact that Spurs may have a sweetener in there in Giovanni Lo Celso, a man that's been managed by Unai Emery before, has liked the way he plays. Is that a move you could see in your mind, just maybe from an opinion piece happening, Dal?
I think it'd be a terrific signing for you, but I'd be very, very surprised if A, Villa were to sell him, and B, Ramsey were to choose to go. I think with Villa in the Champions League at the moment under Unai Emery, they're going from strength to strength. They had no right to be there, but I think everybody saw just how good a coach Emery is with what he did there. And he improved individual players as well. I think Ramsey is a player who is only 23, but he's got such a high ceiling. And there is so much improvement that he was able to make under Emery. And as things stand, Villa have said they don't want to sell. So even though you guys could find the money to offer, and obviously you could offer Lo Celso as well, I don't think Villa would sell, and I don't think he would want to go. I think he would want to play Champions League football next season.
It's interesting. I think one Macca that, tell me if I'm wrong, I don't want to assume you're minded, but I think one that, is it fair to say there's been a change in shift in the fan base on him? That's Conor Gallagher. Macca, I mean, 18 months ago, 12 months ago, there seems to be a real kind of willingness to see what Conor Gallagher would do at Spurs. It feels like Macca that slowly drifted away. Is that fair to say, Macca and Conor Gallagher now? Where do you stand for you on that?
I think it's because it's been around for so long, that it's been swirling around for so long. I think the thing that with me about Conor Gallagher has always been the same, is that he's Chelsea through and through. And it never, here he is, yeah. He never, that was Doué, the other fella. He never.
We're trying to slide him out.
You know what I mean? He's like putting him in there,
Trying to fly him in. We'll fly him in a minute.
I think the thing is with Conor is that he is Chelsea through and through. Last year was their captain. He got to, Maurizio got him to 2 finals, and he could have been lifting a fight. He could have been lifting a cut, and he didn't. But he could have been as their captain. And I think that doesn't fit right. Well, I'm not saying with a lot of Spurs. I'm just going to say with me. I'm not sure if I'm a fully Chelsea player. I'm not sure I want to play for Spurs. Do you know what I mean? Actually, as a fully Spurs guy, I'm not sure I want to fully Chelsea player. Having said all of that, and I've been put to rights on this before about, the likes of Bale coming to the football club, or, James Maddison come to a football club, Darren Bent, obviously a colleague, esteemed colleague of yours, Darren, as well. He's a full-on gooner. And, and that bothers me. I'm not going to lie. As a Spurs fan, I'm not a journalist, I'm a fan. That bothers me that a full-on Arsenal fan can come and play for our club. And, even Harry said that he should have scored the beach ball. Like, even Sandra would have scored it or whatever. But,
if Gallagher were to sign for you, would you get behind him?
I personally, I would, but I don't think that he actually wants to be there. Like, I don't actually think he wants to be there. If Spurs are the only, it's like the great Paul O'Keefe, when he was on our show a couple of weeks ago, said, if Spurs are the only club that come in for him, of course that he wants to go there because they're the only club. But does he actually want to be there? Like, it's the underlying attitude thing that's going around with Ivan Toney at the moment. Like people were saying about his attitude thing because of a few interviews he's done. I'm not sure, Darren. I'd get behind him because if he signed, he's professional. He's a professional player. But I honestly, if you was in a room with him with his mates, going, mate, how can you sign for Spurs? You're Chelsea. Yeah, but it was the only club that was coming in for me. Like, that's not anything professional, of my opinion. That's just my opinion. I just don't see how they can give it 100% if they're 1%. Look, I'll frame it like this, right? 1% drop off at elite level Premier League is an absolute chasm, and you have to be right on it. And if there's any time that you just drop, you can end up losing 3-0 to Brentford or 3-0 to Ipswich Town.
The only thing I would say is that, and I can tell you this because I've spoken to myself in pre-season a couple of seasons ago when they were in America, and he's very open about the fact that he is desperate to play for Chelsea. And he'd had that amazing season at Crystal Palace, and Palace wanted to keep him for another season on loan. And he said, I don't want to go back there. I want to fight. Even if I get minutes, I want to play for Chelsea. But what we also know is that there are lots of players who have done superbly well for football clubs that are not fans of those football clubs because a job is a job at the end of the day. And secondly, I think as far as he's concerned, Gallagher, he may not have a choice because it looks as though Chelsea want to sell him to get the money back for him. And if Chelsea want to sell him, then why would you not? I can see all about the rivalries and whatever else, but if he materially improves your team, which I think he would, then why would you not sign him?
Do you see him leaving Chelsea then, Dal, this summer? Do you expect him to leave Chelsea?
I don't think he would push for it, but I would not be surprised if Chelsea sold him. That's been the mood music for a long time.
Yeah, because one or two things got to happen there. If he's going to sign a new contract or he's going to go, surely you can't have a situation where he carries on there and without a contract being signed, right? That's got to be sorted one way or another this summer. You'd have to think so.
Yeah. I mean, I'd get behind him because, one, if he signs a contract with us, like with any player that comes to us, he's
Tottenham
a
player.
Spurs player. And secondly, we know on good authority on the show that the club really like him. We say the club, Ange. Ange wants the player.
Ange really likes the player. Yeah.
So if Ange wants a player, by the definition of backing Ange, if we go and sign Conor Gallagher, that is the definition of backing Ange. But what I would say, and this would be very interesting, and we can all come in here and have egg on my face, or we can have a laugh about it, at the end of the transfer window. If Newcastle coming for him and Spurs coming for him, it'd be very interesting to see which one he goes to. And I think that would be telling, won't it? Because he's a London lad. He's in London. Would he want to go to Newcastle? If he goes to Newcastle, it'd be because of that the points that I made earlier. And I just think that I actually think he does improve Spurs. I actually do. I think he improves us a lot. His high press, the intensity of his press is good. And people forget, again, he got some stick in the England camp. He can't do it. You can do it. He had dribs and drabs. And this is a guy that through the academy won the World Cup. Was it under 17, under 18 World Cup? Like to your point down earlier about the Spain teams coming through. Conor Gallagher's done it along with Mark Gay here, along with Phil Foden. They've won these international tournaments at lower levels. He ain't a bad player at all. So let's see what happens.
Crackers makes a great point here. Why leave Chelsea? They seem such a happy and settled squad. Such a calm and influence at Chelsea. Nothing really goes crazy there. I don't know. Again, from the outside looking in, it feels like that situation's got to be resolved one way or another. It feels like one player that will not be joining Spurs is someone that I know many fans were excited about a couple of weeks ago, and I make a joke out of this. We've been trying to say his name for the last 2-3 weeks, and by the time I get to learn to say his name, he's no longer a target. And that's the prominent name of Desiree Doué. I don't know, Dow, if you've got any feeling on this one of where this player might go. I think I'd say Spurs fans would love to see him sign for us. 2 or 3 weeks ago, there was genuine hope Spurs could prize yet another sensational teenager to the football club, but it feels maybe that move has now gone beyond us. We know there seems to be interest in PSG. There's Bayern Munich in there. Dow, would you be really surprised to see this guy rock up in North London? Do you think he's destined for one of those, maybe, dare I say, super clubs? We'll have to bring Dow off mute. Dow, are you able to unmute from your end? We're going to try and bring Dow off mute.
No, sorry. That was my fault. I pressed it by accident. I'm sorry.
We thought you want to talk about the player there for a second. That's my
way of saying I've got nothing to say. I think, again, he's a prospect. He's a teenager. I think he's 19 years of age.
Yep.
PSG have gone in quite hard for him. I think it's £33 million with add-ons. The whole thing goes up to around about £42 million. He looks good. Bayern Munich have a very strong interest in him as well. And I think the level of expenditure is moving away from the kind of money that you guys want to be spending. I think there is value. Personally, I think there is better value to be had. I think he's a good player. Clearly, he's got ability. But I just think for his age, and again, you guys have had your fingers burnt so much that if you're going to spend that amount of money, you want to be sure about what you're getting. And I would suggest a player who has proven to have done it in the English Premier League, or even in the Championship, or in British football, should we say, rather than, because you've bought so many players, Lamela, Lo Celso, who, okay, he's come good recently, but he's never really hit the heights of what you expected from him. I know Davinson Sanchez, you spent £42 million on him. He was a bitter disappointment. You mentioned Ndombele as well. And for all those reasons, it's the reason why I totally agree with you over Pedro Neto. I think he's got such a horrific injury record. Talented player, really good player, but his injury record, you've been there before. And that's why I don't think that level of expenditure you're going to be looking at either for him or for Doué.
Before I bring Maka back in, I want to ask you something. I haven't had a chance to ask you this question yet. Ange said midway through the point of the season, would Tottenham ever sell or would want £100 million player? Ange's response was, I'd love to bring in 2 players for 50 million. And the reason why I ask you that is that, again, it's not to start off another debate, because I think could kick off with me and Maka here now if I say this, but we saw Arsenal with Declan Rice. That player was what they wanted, and they had to fight off Man City. I'm not sure how much they had to fight off Man City. You might know more about it than me, Dale. You're definitely more about it than me anyway on this. But they got their man eventually. And my feeling is that if there's a player that Ange wants, that definitively improves the first team and you've got to go above the £50 million mark. Look, it's not my money, right? I'm just a fan. But I would hate the fact that Spurs would be against the idea of going above that fee just because he's going to be worth more money and they've been burnt in the past. You mentioned it, the likes of Ndombele, the likes of Lo Celso, Soldado. They have spent big before and they haven't got the full return of a player. As a fan, is that concerning? I mean, look, Liverpool, when they needed to, they've spent the money to get the players they need, the likes of Virgil van Dijk, Alisson, the goalkeeper. At some point, do you have to think, you know what, there may be a time we have to spend that 100 million to get a player that you know has done it and won it like Declan Rice had done at West Ham?
Can I just answer that? Can I just with the exception of Alisson, most of the players that you're talking about have done it in British football. Yeah, Virgil van Dijk, he was up in Scotland, he ripped it up. Sadio Mane was down at Southampton, he ripped it up. Andy Robertson at Liverpool, he was at Hull, and even though they went down, he had the quality to come back into the Premier League. Fabio Carvalho, they signed him from Fulham at Liverpool. There are so many players that those guys have spent big money on that have come from other British clubs. And I just think the players that you read out that Spurs have had their fingers burnt on, there have been players that have come in from other leagues, big money. And for you guys, and the club have been very honest with you when they've sat down in fans forums and said, we don't have the expenditure of other clubs, so we have to take a few risks. There was that player that they bought from France, Enquiries. He was so raw, he was in the butchers, but the problem is that's what you have to do.
Yeah.
Sorry about that one.
I know because we had Nkudu as well. We had the double.
Nkudu and Jai, they got Doué vibes, man. I'm telling you, because that's the reality. Like, we've had it, Gedson Fernandez. We got the wrong one, didn't we? But Man United got Fernandez, Bruno. We got Gedson. Where's he now? Do you know what I mean? Like, it's reality, innit? We've had it. We had Postecoglou. We had this young Portuguese, amazing talent coming in. Man United got Ronaldo. We got Postecoglou. What happened to Postecoglou? I mean, we've seen it a lot. So
I don't mean disrespectfully. We went to get Skriniar. We came back with Joe Roden. I mean, this is what we had under Mourinho. Mourinho didn't know what was happening with him.
Both of you can tell, and even our viewers, there are so many players over so many years that you guys have had to take risks on. So I can see why now you're looking at players that have done it in British football, that the manager trusts, knows that they're going to do well, and can bring them in. And that's why I think maybe one or two players at Celtic might come in if they're players that have played for him before. But if they're not, then I think it'll be the case that the players that come in, they'll have some level of experience. But I cannot see the club just speculating on £42 million on a 19-year-old winger who may or may not do it in the Premier League. You guys have been there too many times.
Yeah,
well, you mentioned
Sorry, just to follow on that as well. I mean, you look at that the British talent or Premier League proven or British proven. Now, Eze, and there's a lot of people want to talk about him. I want him at the football club. I don't care what anyone else. My opinion, that's what I want him at the football club. I actually do think that we've got the funds. Well, I know we've got the funds. I do think we'd actually go and spend 65 million on a player that does fit, Darren, to what you just talked about, which is Premier League proven or British proven. We talked about Ivan Toney. We're probably getting, less than that. Conor Gallagher's proven. I think Eberechi Eze is proven. I think he is a David Ginola type signing. He's a Tottenham signing. He's the type of individual that Spurs fans crave. This is why the comments go mad about him. Yes, he's expensive, but he's not a £65 million risk like a £42 million risk is for Doué. Do you see what I'm coming from? Because I think he's done it over that period of time. He's come through the lower leagues, been at QPR, gone into Palace, done brilliantly, had a fantastic season last year, breakthrough season. And I think that's the sort of signing that I could see Spurs splashing the cash, for want of a better expression, on. Don't poo-poo it, Darren.
No, that one, to be honest with you, that one I wouldn't poo-poo. I think Eze has interest from all of the top teams. He is a fantastic player. He's confident. He's versatile. He's intelligent on the ball. And if you are looking for serious competition in that playmaker role between Maddison and Eze, I mean, goodness me, you're going to be getting it. And this is what I mean about if you've got that level of expenditure, I'd far rather lay it out on someone like an Eze, who's been in the Premier League, who's used to the Premier League, who's come up against all of the opponents he would be playing for if he were playing for you, rather than a Doué. Maybe there are so many players whose names are floating around. You know, it happens every summer, and they're risks. Eze's not a risk.
Can I ask you, Dow? This is not a trick question or to try and stumble you into this. Would you be stunned if he did come to Spurs, or could you actually see that happening? Or do you feel, like you said there, he will be the interest of a lot of top Premier League clubs? Do you see him going above Spurs?
I think there are other clubs with more money interested in Eze. I think Spurs are in the mix for sure, but I know for a fact that there are other clubs with a lot of money interested in Eze. And it might even be a little bit like 𝐂𝐲𝐭𝐞𝐧𝐭, where one of the superpower European clubs come from the clouds and snap him up. But I know that there is a lot of big interest in Eze. And I think somebody could easily pay that amount of money this summer and that he could go.
It's interesting because obviously the way that move is structured is that he has a release clause. So, I mean, we've had this question, we've come up with this before the last 3-4 shows with different journalists. Is it just a case in your mind, Dow, you go in there, you walk through the front door and you pay the release clause and you get to speak to the player? Is it as easy as that? Or is there more depth to a release clause of this nature from your understanding?
You know, I think it is the case that it will effectively, you know, the clubs will meet the release clause and then it will be up to him to decide where he goes. And I'm thinking that he would want to go to one of the clubs that play Champions League football, just like 𝐂𝐿𝐴 has done,
right?
Where he's, you know, fairly certain to get into the team as well.
Yep, it will be interesting. I
think he has the phone call with Ange, right? That's the only thing. That's the only thing we're hoping. The phone, the famous Ange phone call that gets Maddison over the line, that gets Bergvall over the line, that gets Dragusin to come to us, that he could have been playing in the Champions League and been going in Bayern, and he comes to sit on the bench for 6 months. Maybe whatever he says on that phone call, I want a piece of that every day when I wake up.
Can I quickly play? I know you guys have got me on to ask me questions, but I just want to play a quick game of yes or no, right? So I've just seen Adam Salim in the comments has mentioned some of the players.
No, we can't say that before you start. No, we can't change the bloody football club, all right? I've tried to do that for the last 20 years. We've tried, all right? We've tried. We're stuck with him.
Would you take Bowen from West Ham?
Well, I think he does walk in. I think he starts in our team. There's no doubt about it, doesn't he? Yeah, I mean, I'd say yes. Yeah,
I'd say yes.
Would you take Wharton in the midfield?
I think the only thing with Wharton for me is probably only 1 year further ahead than some of the other people that we've just been speaking about in terms for our academy and all that. So I'd probably say no.
Okay. Would you take Tyrick Mitchell from Crystal Palace?
Yeah, I would. Sorry, Rick, are you going to answer?
I mean, he's good players. I mean, I'm not sure whether these are game changers for Tottenham. I think Wharton's a good Premier League player. I don't think he changes Spurs in terms of he's the game changer. I mean, I have got reservations about Spurs' midfield. I think he's a good young player. Many are suggesting yes for Wharton. I'll be honest, I didn't see enough of him at Palace last season, but again, got in the England squad and many feel he's an upgrade. So
is he a 6? Is he an 8? Wharton. Is he a number 6 or is he a number 8?
Are you debating this between yourselves, or
no? I'm asking. Yeah, I'm asking. Like, where do you play? Like, because I think a lot of people, and it goes back to the point you made earlier, Darren, about Wanyama and Dembele. We need a number 6. Like we'd say
anything. I mean, I say anything right now.
No,
I do agree with that. But I think that he's such an intelligent player. It's a shame we didn't see more of him at the Euros because he does have that ability to destroy, but he does have a good passing range on him as well. So I'd be quite fascinated to see him.
Yeah, maybe we should take him. Yeah,
I'll give you one more before I actually hand your show back over to you.
No, I mean, it's interesting. It's interesting stuff.
We're loving it.
Would you take, given that I've said, you know, it's probably better to lay out big money on players that are proven in this league. Would you take Dominic Solanke?
No, I don't think
He's not better. He's not significantly better than Richarlison, in my opinion. So I wouldn't take him.
Okay. He had a good scoring season last season, didn't he, for Bournemouth, to be fair to him. Had a good, decent season. I think the thing with Tottenham is that Richarlison, for the amount of money we spent out on Richarlison, his injury record is really concerning. And I feel with Spurs, it's hard. We're never going to get a Harry Kane, are we, again? Like, that player we had was incredible. So the problem is you're trying to find a replacement for somebody that we all know is irreplaceable to some degree. But what you can do is you can bring in players that can accumulate goals to your system. And that's what I think Spurs need to do this summer. I think with Richarlison, I don't know, Dal, do you ever feel Richarlison will leave? Because, again, he seems quite happy to stay in England, but there's reported Saudi interest. I mean, what do you think? Because that's a way of generating big funds, isn't it? I mean, again, he'd be quite a prime star out in Saudi to get, a Brazilian international still in his prime at 27, right?
I think if the price is right, then I think Spurs, as you guys know, I remember when you had Paulinho in midfield and the offer came in from China and it was just too good to turn down. And off he went. So I think if the price is right and you get a good enough offer, a big enough offer, you would sell and use the money to reinvest. I mean, let's say for argument's sake, that you are offered your money back for Richarlison.
I think we would take money that woman. Yeah,
exactly. And then if you invest, because the word is that Brentford would take as little as 30 million pounds now.
Oh God, I think Toney.
I think that's a no-brainer.
Toney for Richarlison is an absolute no-brainer. I think.
No, but I think it's a no-brainer for the 25-30 million, but not to replace Richarlison. I think if Richarlison leaves, you need to get two strikers in.
Yeah, I agree.
Right? You're not just one; you need to get two. And I think Richarlison, for all his faults, for all his love, I think Richarlison is a human being. People fall in love with him as a human.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Sometimes a player is really frustrating.
Yeah.
So that you're conflicting. But I think if you look at Richarlison, you look at statistics, you look at what he gives you over the last 5 years and what we project, you're probably looking at double figures Premier League goals, 10, 11, 12. You might get to 15 if he stays fit, and it might get 5 or 6 assists or something like that. It's a good contribution as a kind of backup or a second string striker. But then you bring in a Toney that's going to be your number 9, your number 1 striker, and then let them two fight it. It's the same with a Solanke. Like, actually, is Ivan Toney much better than Solanke? You could argue, well, no, if you look at his last 3 seasons, but you could also argue that Solanke went to Liverpool when he was obviously a lot younger, and he didn't do the business, did he? Let's be frank about it. It's a little bit like the chap that played for Palace, Wilfried Zaha, 15 million to Man United, and he didn't do anything. He went back. He was a baller at Palace. Sometimes you just find your level, and that's no disrespect. Sometimes you do, and I think Ivan Toney, with a no-look penalty in a penalty shootout in the Euros, has shown that he's got a lot of confidence about the fella that he's going to walk into a top club and do the business. So just finishing off, sorry, Vic, just on that point, I think that if you sell Richarlison, I don't think you just go and buy one. You have to go and buy 2. And I don't think if you look at let's be realistic. The fans can go mad. We can all go mad if we want, right? But the reality of the situation is, it's a super club comes in for a player. Spurs ain't getting them. So it's not happening, right? They are going to that superpower, So we're not at the top level. We have to be at the other level. We have to know your level, right? If that makes you feel uncomfortable, get over it, because that's where Spurs are. But the reality is, Richarlison and an Ivan Toney in this side, they probably score 35 goals plus between them in the season. Now that's decent work. That is decent work. Or you go sell them both and go and buy that 𝐂𝐤𝐂𝐬, right? Who you could have bought from Brighton, or you could have bought from Brighton for 2 million quid, like less than 2 years ago. And they're going to spaff 85 million on the bloke who's just torn up the Portuguese league because people on Football Manager or whatever they're on. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't want to be rude, but it's just that's the reality. That's the way I look at it. You look at proven Premier League goal scorers, And Richarlison is not all that. But if you look at what he can bring to you, he creates goals, he brings goals, as well as an Ivan Toney. If you're just saying to me, we're not going to sign another striker and we've got Richarlison, I'm very unhappy. But if we sign the Toney and the Richarlison, I think that's decent.
I think you're absolutely right. I would keep Richarlison and sign Toney, because the one thing that you didn't have last season was depth.
Yep.
And that's the thing that you need this time around. If you buy Toney and keep Richarlison, you have depth and you have variation, and that's what you need to your play. As for all the talk about 𝐿𝐸, yes, he's a good age. He's 26 years of age, but £84 million is just not going to happen to Spurs. So I wouldn't even waste any energy on that. That's not happening.
Now, I want to ask you a couple of closing questions. Can I just say, whenever we've got you here, time absolutely flies by, doesn't it? I mean, we could talk to you for hours, quite literally hours. And that's why, again, I say this, when we got you on twice, and it's twice in a year, we absolutely, mate, we love it. So we can't thank you enough. A couple of final questions we want to ask you, I suppose. One of them being, look, we've discussed potential targets. What do you feel Spurs will end up with in terms of players coming in now? Obviously, they've signed Archie Gray. It's maybe giving us a number. We always ask you about this every window. And the good thing with you, Dow, is you're only on twice a season. So people, they forget, Dow. So you can say whatever number you want. I can tell you, they won't remember. They won't remember.
It's like the old David Brent.
Yeah, they'll never know. They'll never know.
I think 4 players in total.
Okay.
Not including Gray. I think you need
4 to come. You're saying 4 more to come.
I think you do need a little bit more in midfield, particularly if 𝐿𝐸 were to go. Yep. I did see somewhere that, and I'd have to follow up on it, maybe a bit of interest in McTominay. I think he's a seriously underrated player, and I think he would be good if he were available, but his wages obviously would be very, very expensive.
I look impressed. Macca's
I
face
know
says
you wouldn't
everything.
have him, but I'm a fan.
I don't know. Look, I mean, whenever I don't know, McTominay is the sort of, he's got that. I don't want to be disrespectful to him, but this is a very good trait. I'm not clever. I've got all these great things, but one thing I have got is determination and grit and hunger, and I think McTominay's got them qualities. It's like a John McGinn's got the same scenario. Do you know what I mean? Like it's maybe it's that Conor Gallagher factor as well. It's we do need that in our midfield, right? We do need to have that person that's going to go, give me the ball, I'm having it. And maybe McTominay is that player, but it's not. It's not the sexy signing that most.
That's what I'm about to say. It's not a sexy name, is it? But it doesn't have to be sexy.
Just on that, I'll go back to where I started earlier this evening. The Spain team there are lots of players in it that are not sexy, but they've taught us that the teams that win things have a sprinkling of stardust, but a lot of workhorses. A number of workhorses. And I think sometimes if you're going to build a team going forward to achieve things, there are going to be players that aren't particularly sexy. But you realize their effectiveness to a team when they're out of it. I saw today on social media a preseason post, an early season post from a Manchester City game a few years back, probably about 5 or 6, before they started winning titles. And it was the midfield that was being heavily criticized online on this post by fans of their own club had in it Gundogan and Rodri. And it just tells you that how people don't appreciate the players whose job you only really realize when those players are not in the team.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff. Right, well, listen, I think I ran up on a final one, and I haven't asked Macca to predict the season yet, but Macca's already told us that we're going to be finishing above 5th, because that was, you say above 5th, Macca? Because that was the benchmark, wasn't it? Macca's at 3rd. Macca's going 3rd. Season of transition. Now, what do you think for this season? You're going to be in and around the pressers. We know you're going to be there. Look, you had the pleasure of being with Ange last season at certain points. You arguably saw him really, again, I'll go back to it, maybe not at his lowest there, that's not fair to say, but at a point really in the season where he was under pressure in that Arsenal presser. I mean, let's close it on that point, actually. Look, you saw him in that Arsenal presser. What's your feelings and takeaways from at that point? Because I don't know if you agree, Macca, I think at that point was a time where, as Spurs fans, you're already feeling that we're getting under the skin of this manager. and he's already getting frustrated. And I'll be honest, at that point, there was a concern that maybe we got that battering by Liverpool. I say battering 4-2. He lost at home to Arsenal. I say this is why, again, Dow, there's certain things in my mind from last season I can't get out of my head. 4-0 away to Newcastle, 4-1, 4-2 against Brighton, defeated. The Liverpool defeat. There's certain things that stay in my mind that I want to eradicate and be all happy and full of roses going into the start of next season. But there are some real inflicted scars on me that I can't get away from, that I need to have a positive summer to lift me again to go into next season. So again, you saw him at his lowest ebb, I think, in that presser at the obviously post-Arsenal game or pre-Arsenal game. What was your feelings on it in terms of Ange's mood then and what you feel now going into this season position-wise?
I think even though he's been in situations where he's managed in games with massive rivalries, obviously the Old Firm, how much bigger can you get than that up in Scotland? He probably hadn't appreciated the depth of feeling around the North London derby, and I think he's managed to understand that. And he's somebody who likes to educate himself all the time, which is what I like about him. He's achieved so much, but he's so humble into so much as he's willing to say, look, fair enough, I didn't get it, but I didn't get it because I'm a winner. I want to win everything. We talked about PLT early on. That's the kind of culture that he wants to establish. He wants to cut through some of those things that you could argue have held Spurs back in the past, because I remember Pochettino saying, you're going to get involved with Arsenal and all of that. Let's just focus on what we want to do and not finishing above the people down the road. And that's why you guys got to Champions League season after season, why you got to the final in 2018, 2019, and why you guys sort of went places. And I think that's what he wants to do as well. I think he's going to remember that feeling of missing out on the Champions League and really bring in the squad depth to keep you guys competitive this time around. And that's why I think it's going to be a good season for you, because of that depth. And I would be very surprised if by the end of this window, you guys were not very satisfied with the work he's done.
Top four, Dale? Top four?
Yeah, why not? I mean, I said before, there are so many teams that are in transition at the moment. I do think Villa are very strong. I do. Obviously, the top two, City and Arsenal, are going to be City and Arsenal. But I think there's transition at Liverpool. There's uncertainty around two or three of their best players, Van Dijk, Alexander-Arnold, Salah. And I think as far as Chelsea are concerned, well, you guys all know what's going on there. So, I think maybe that fourth Champions League place is up for grabs at the very least. And in the cup competitions, anything can happen. Yeah, you just seen England get to a final.
We have indeed. We have. Dal, can I just say, it's always an education. It's always a pleasure. Look, we've got over 5,000 of you plus that are watching us live on YouTube, on Instagram, on X, on Facebook. Again, it's unbelievable, really. We get this support for these shows. Again, we've not even kicked off the season yet. We've not even had the struggles yet. We've got those. You've gone too early, everybody. You've gone too early. You're not even here for the crisis shows yet. This hasn't happened yet. You've come far too early. Come back in October.
Come back in October. It's the Spurs, mate. They're coming.
Now,
if I'm allowed, I'll be happy to.
Oh, bless you, mate. Now, look, for those that don't know where to find you, and look, I'm blessed because we hear and see you wherever we turn on our TVs these days. You're just so amazing. Everybody wants a piece of Darren, the wonderful Darren Lewis. Darren, where can everybody find the wonderful work you do for the footballing community?
I'm at Mirror Darren, and I'm at Mirror Football on the Daily Mirror. And obviously, Super Sunday Match Day is back at mid-August. I don't know exactly which date, but we'll be back mid-August on Sky Sports News.
Dal, you're a star. Mac, I'm sure you agree. We could speak to this man for hours, and it's always a pleasure, right? Love having Darren on.
Soothing, mate. It's absolutely soothing.
He has
just a soothing voice. No, it's absolutely superb, Dan. Thank you so much. And yeah, thanks for having me back on. Appreciate it. As always, there's going to be more and more shows coming the viewers and listeners' way. Love getting some nice opinions from everyone, throwing it in there. There's a few people think we're going to get relegated next year. Let's see what happens.
I think again, second season. I think with Tottenham, second seasons. I mean, we've been there before with. Need I say the last 3-4 managers? You never know what you're really going to get. We've just had a manager for the first time complete a season over the first 6, haven't we? He's the first manager at the last 6 to finish a first season.
That's
so again,
right, he is.
Yeah, 100%.
That's
many
probably
would
why
say.
when you see him on the TV, he's always watching his back.
You never know what's coming his way. And again, it makes that point as well. Again, Dow calls it a special season. I suppose for him to finish in charge is a special season because no one's done it. You've got to say in the last 6 of the managers.
Yeah.
So look, we shall see. Listen, again, incredible support for the show. Thank you so much. Love to you all. Like I say, we'll be back with you very, very soon. From myself, from the wonderful Lee McQueen, from the brilliant Darren Lewis from the Mirror. We've been the last one on Spurs. Please keep safe, keep well. And as always, come on, you Spurs. And I might ask Macca to close this off for us.